Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, January 22nd, 2026. Former Special Counsel Jack Smith defends his investigations of and criminal charges brought against Donald Trump in testimony before the House Judiciary Committee. President Trump launches his Board of Peace, initially proposed to maintain the ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas, but now the president suggests it could expand its scope to bring peace to the world. Still not many details from President Trump about the deal he said is being negotiated on Greenland, other than the U.S. will have, quote, total access. U.S. House votes on a war powers resolution requiring the president to get congressional approval for further military action against Venezuela. House moves to complete the fiscal year 2026 spending bills as the one funding the Homeland Security Department draws Democratic opposition over not having reforms to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. Vice President J.D. Vance visits Minneapolis to support ICE operations there. Healthcare company CEOs testified before a House committee on healthcare affordability, and child welfare advocate Paris Hilton lobbies on Capitol Hill for a bill to allow victims of non-consensual deep fake pornography to sue those who make it and distribute it. And we begin with former Special Counsel Jack Smith, who told the House Judiciary Committee that he has no partisan loyalties and his decisions to charge President Donald Trump with interference in the 2020 presidential election and mishandling classified documents were based solely on the evidence.
During my tenure as special counsel, we followed Justice Department policies, we observed legal requirements, and took actions based on the facts and the law. I made my decisions without regard to President Trump's political association, activities, beliefs, or candidacy in the 2024 election. President Trump was charged because the evidence established that he willfully broke the law, the very laws he took an oath to uphold. Grand juries in two separate districts reached this conclusion based on his actions, as alleged in the indictments they returned. Rather than accept his defeat in the 2020 election, President Trump engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the results and prevent the lawful transfer of power. After leaving office in January of 21, President Trump illegally kept classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago social club and repeatedly tried to obstruct justice to conceal his continued retention of those documents. Highly sensitive national security information was held in a ballroom and a bathroom. As I testify before the committee today, I want to be clear. I stand by my decisions as special counsel, including the decision to bring charges against President Trump.
Jack Smith, part of his opening statement today to the House Judiciary Committee. Donald Trump pleaded not guilty to all the charges, and then both cases against him were dropped after he won re-election in 2024 because the Justice Department has a long-standing policy not to prosecute a sitting president. Many Republican members of the Judiciary Committee focused today on the grand jury subpoena in the election interference case to get phone call records, known as toll records, of 8 senators and the House Speaker. The records include phone numbers for incoming and outgoing calls and time and duration of the calls, but not the content. Congressman Kevin Kiley, Republican of California, brought this up in his questions.
Shortly after you became special counsel, you issued a subpoena for the phone records of the Speaker of the House of Representatives over a 2-month period, along with for other senators and representatives, even though the public integrity section at DOJ cited litigation risk to doing this. What was that litigation risk?
With respect to the toll record subpoenas that we issued, they were approved by the public integrity section. The public integrity section, in approving those subpoenas, noted the fact that the subpoenas were for records for people who were not targets of our investigation.
But they said there was a litigation risk and you moved forward with it anyway. And not only that, but you also sought orders from judges making it so those who were having their records seized would not know about it. And you even didn't tell those judges that it was members of Congress whose records you were going after, in apparent contravention of a federal statute saying that a telephone provider for a Senate office shall not be barred from providing notice that the records had been requested. Now, if you sought to do that today, would you be able to get away with that, with asking the judges for a non-disclosure order without telling them these are members of Congress?
When we secured these toll record subpoenas, it was done consistent with department policy. You're correct in that that policy has since changed.
They changed the policy based upon the actions that you took. Similarly, you issued a gag order against President Trump that the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals vacated as overbroad. Is that correct?
Well, the D.C. Court of Appeals, in passing on that order, found that it was justified. They narrowed the order, but they confirmed that the phenomenon—
They narrowed the order because it was overbroad. In addition to that, you sought an early trial date that the district court rejected, and when you presented your prosecution memo to Attorney General Garland, it's been reported that he was visibly unimpressed and expressed First Amendment concerns. So, Mr. Smith, looking at the record, I see that you were reversed and rebuked by the Department of Justice itself, by the Attorney General, by the Solicitor General, by multiple district court judges, by the Court of Appeals, and by the U.S. Supreme Court itself. So my final question is, do you believe that you made any mistakes? Do you have any regrets as to how you conducted this investigation?
If I have any regret, it would be not expressing enough appreciation for my staff who work so hard in these investigations. We followed the facts and the law. These people who work for me sacrificed endlessly and have endured way too much for just doing their job. So if anything, I wish that I had thanked them.
I'm the gentleman.
So no mistakes. There's that humility. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Congressman Kevin Kiley, Republican from California, questioning former Special Counsel Jack Smith at today's Judiciary Committee hearing. The House today voted 427-0 to block payments to senators whose phone data was collected in the investigation of Donald Trump's role in overturning the 2020 election, repealing a provision in a spending bill signed into law last year. The amendment today was added to the fiscal year 2026 Homeland Security Department spending bill, which then passed the House. Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, Democrat from California, asked Jack Smith today about the strength of the case against Donald Trump involving Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 presidential election.
Mr. Smith, in your deposition with this committee, you testified, and here's a quote, "Our case was built on, frankly, Republicans who put their allegiance to the country before the party." That the president's closest allies are telling him that his claims of election fraud are wrong. And so I'm just wondering, can you explain what you meant in your deposition, that it was Republicans who were putting their allegiance to their country ahead of their party?
Yes. There were witnesses who I felt would be very strong witnesses, including, for example, the Secretary of State in Georgia, who told Donald Trump the truth, told him things that he did not want to hear, and put him on notice that what he was saying was false. These were people who knew how the elections were conducted in these states, and I believe that witnesses of that nature, witnesses who are willing to tell the truth, even if it's going to impose a cost on them in their lives, my experience as a prosecutor over 30 years is that witnesses like that are very credible, and that jurors tend to believe witnesses like that because they pay a cost for telling the truth.
In terms of the grand jury testimony that's now been released, the fact that Donald Trump, according to Senator Graham, would believe that Martians stole the election, what does that tell you about Trump's state of mind?
That statement is consistent with what we found in our investigation, in that our investigation revealed that Donald Trump was not looking for honest answers about whether there was fraud in the election. He was looking for ways to stay in power. And when people told him things that conflicted with him staying in power, he rejected them, or he chose not even to contact people like that who would know if the election was done properly in the state. On the other hand, when individuals would say things that would allow him to stay in power no matter how fantastical, he would latch onto those. That pattern, over time, we felt was powerful evidence that he, in fact, knew that the fraud claims he was making were false.
Former Special Counsel Jack Smith questioning from Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, Democrat from California, at a Judiciary Committee hearing. Jack Smith also spoke about evidence of targeting of witnesses in both the election interference and classified documents cases against Donald Trump, saying that threat to witnesses was only confirmed when we went forward in this case, and Donald Trump suggested that one witness should be put to death, and then also issued a statement to the effect of, "If you come after me, I'm coming after you." C-SPAN covered the hearing in its entirety, and we have it archived at cspan.org. Runs about 4 hours. President Trump posting on Truth Social after the hearing, based on his testimony today, there is no question that deranged Jack Smith should be prosecuted for his actions. He destroyed the lives of many innocent people, which has been his history as a prosecutor. At a minimum, he committed large-scale perjury. Washington Post writing that President Donald Trump said Thursday that he wants his new Board of Peace to work with the United Nations, but it was unclear if that pledge would ease concerns among some leaders that he's trying to sideline the international body. Trump discussed the potential for collaboration at the board's formal launch, which his administration has advertised as a tool to resolve global conflicts with a scope rivaling the UN. He was joined by 19 world leaders, but just 2 representatives from European Union nations, Hungary and Bulgaria, a contrast that underscored his ambition to reshape the world order and the limits of his approach. That was from the Washington Post article. The meeting was held in Davos, Switzerland. President Trump spoke about the original reason for the Board of Peace, helping along the Israel-Hamas peace process in Gaza, and then the larger vision.
We're committed to ensuring Gaza is demilitarized, properly governed, and beautifully rebuilt. It's going to be a great plan, and that's where the Board of Peace really started. And I think we can spread out to other things as we succeed with Gaza. We're going to be very successful in Gaza. It's going to be a great thing to watch, and we can do other things. We can do numerous other things. Once this board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do, and we'll do it in conjunction with the United Nations. You know, I've always said the United Nations has got tremendous potential, has not used it, but there's tremendous potential in the United Nations, and you have some great people at the United Nations, but so far it hasn't. You know, on the 8 wars that I ended, I never spoke to the United Nations about any of them. And you would think that I should have. You would think they could have done those 8 wars, but they couldn't have. And they tried, I guess, in some of them, but they didn't try hard enough. But there's tremendous potential with the United Nations. And I think the combination of the Board of Peace with the kind of people we have here, coupled with the United Nations, can be, you know, something very, very unique for the world. It's for the world. This isn't United States. This is for the world. As everyone can see today, the first steps toward a brighter day for the Middle East and a much safer future for the world are unfolding right before your very eyes. Together, we are in a position to have an incredible chance. I don't even call it a chance. I think it's going to happen. To end decades of suffering, stop generations of hatred and bloodshed, and forge a beautiful, everlasting, and glorious peace for that region and for the whole region of the world, because I'm calling the world a region. The world is a region. We're going to have peace in the world.
President Donald Trump at the Board of Peace signing in Davos, Switzerland. New York Times writing about the Board of Peace. The Trump administration laid out an ambitious and highly speculative vision for the future of the Gaza Strip at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland on Thursday, as Washington tries to advance the thorny ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The presentation by Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law, featured slides that depicted gleaming skyscrapers rising on Gaza's coast and the construction of entirely new cities. The plan would require investment of at least $25 billion in the devastated Palestinian enclave, according to the proposal. That was from the New York Times. C-SPAN spoke this morning about the Board of Peace with Washington Times White House reporter Jeff Murdoch.
Well, what's interesting is what they're expected to do and what President Trump has talked about they're doing are 2 completely different things. So what they're expected to do is shepherd Gaza into the post-war era. If the as they move into the second phase of the ceasefire agreement between Israel and the Palestinians and Hamas living in Gaza, what we expect to happen is that they will kind of shepherd and guide the Gaza region into that area. Now, the president has talked about it being a way to resolve international disputes and disputes, particularly in the Middle East, which has caused a lot of concern among Western allies because they're afraid that this is going to end up being a replacement for the United Nations, and they don't want to see this Board of Peace undermine the United Nations. And as such, we've seen a lot of important Western allies not come on board with this. Like, for example, today, earlier this morning, we had the president have the nations that are going to be part of the Board of Peace with him at an event in Davos. And we saw a lot of Eastern European countries, and we saw a lot of Middle Eastern countries like Canada, Great Britain, France. They've all received invitations. They were not there. One of the things that has caused a lot of consternation among world leaders is the president has invited Russian President Vladimir Putin to be a part of it. Now, again, we've got mixed messages. The president has said that Vladimir Putin has agreed to join the Board of Peace. A spokesperson for President Putin has said they have not made a decision and they're reviewing the proposal.
I mean, it certainly does sound like a replacement for the United Nations, because isn't it typically the UN that does all the things that you mentioned? That's exactly right. And I think this underscores the president's constant complaining about the UN, that he's looking to undermine the UN. If you remember, when he went to the UN in October, he absolutely savaged the United Nations and their leaders and said the best they ever do when there's a problem is send a strongly worded letter. And I think if his press conference earlier this week on Tuesday, where he held that 3-hour press conference in the White House briefing room, he repeatedly savaged the UN in that press. So this is a president who does not trust the UN, does not like the UN. That did not help when the elevator broke when he was at the UN back in October. The escalator, yeah. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Yes, the escalator broke. That did not help things. Then the teleprompter went out. And he has sort of used that as a way to prove his claims that either the UN is biased against him or that the UN is effective, depending on which argument he wants to make at that moment.
Washington Times White House reporter Jeff Murdoch joining C-SPAN on this morning's Washington Journal program. This is Washington Today. Guardian writing the European Union are gathering in Brussels to discuss the volatile, quote, new normal in transatlantic relations after weeks of escalating threats from Donald Trump over Greenland that were suddenly dropped over a vague deal on Arctic security. An emergency EU summit was hastily convened earlier this week after the U.S. president announced he would propose 10% tariffs on 8 European nations that defended Greenland, an autonomous territory that is part of Denmark. Although Trump abandoned his tariff threat on Wednesday, EU officials said the summit remained necessary. That was from the Guardian newspaper. The Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, spoke about Greenland as he gave a speech at the World Economic Forum today in Davos, Switzerland.
We share the conviction that as European NATO allies, we must do more to secure the High North as NATO. This is a common transatlantic interest. Germany is doing just that. We are doing it in the framework of NATO, and we will do more. Our neighbors and partners in Europe, including Denmark and the people of Greenland, can count on our solidarity. We will protect Denmark, Greenland, the North, from the threat posed by Russia. We will uphold the principles on which the transatlantic partnership is founded, namely sovereignty and territorial integrity. We support talks between Denmark, Greenland, the United States on the basis of these principles. I have discussed this with President Trump, Prime Minister Frederiksen, Secretary General Mark Rutte, and others in these days. The aim of these talks is to agree for closer cooperation amongst allies in the High North and beyond. It is good news that we are making steps into that right direction. I welcome President Trump's remarks from last night. This is the right way to go. This is the right way because any threat to acquire European territory by force would be unacceptable. And, ladies and gentlemen, new tariffs would also undermine the foundations of transatlantic relations. If they are put in place, Europe's answer would be united, calm, measured, and firm. As we proceed, we are guided by a clear compass. Firstly, in the new age of great powers, Europe must stand together resolutely and sovereignly. And secondly, we should not give up on NATO.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz speaking today at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. President Trump was asked today for details about the deal about Greenland in an interview with Fox Business host Maria Bartiromo.
You have talked about this framework, the beginning of a framework that you've spoken with the NATO secretary about. Can you tell us anything about that? Does this ultimately mean that the U.S. will ultimately acquire Greenland?
Well, I don't know if I can say that, but it could be. I mean, it's possible. Anything's possible. But in the meantime, we're getting everything we wanted, total security, total access to everything, have as many bases, have all the equipment that we want. And very importantly, you know, we're building the Golden Dome, we call it. It was called the Iron Dome. Somehow the Golden Dome sounded a little bit better. But we have a technology that's second to none. You saw what we did with Israel, and that's our genius that did that. And it's amazing. It's just, you know, it's foolproof. And we're going to be building it. And it works much better when we have access to Greenland. Just covers more territory, covers it more accurately. Missiles will be more accurate by having it. It's very important strategically as a piece, and we will have everything we want. We're getting everything we want at no cost.
President Donald Trump interviewed on Fox Business. Story at the Chicago Sun-Times. Senator Dick Durbin on Thursday said President Donald Trump's threats to acquire Greenland and his stark criticism of NATO allies have caused irrevocable damage to the NATO alliance. Durbin last week returned from a bipartisan bicameral congressional delegation trip to Copenhagen, Denmark, to highlight the partnership between the United States and the Kingdom of Denmark. Meetings with Danish and Greenland government and business leaders happened just days before Trump backed off on threats to use military force to acquire Greenland. That was from the Chicago Sun-Times. Senator Durbin, a Democrat, held a news conference today in Chicago.
Fellow Danish and Greenlandic legislators implored us to explain what was going on there. There was a sense of anger as well as pain to think that the United States might in fact invade Greenland or some other entity in an effort for President Trump to take control of that country. We assured them that the overwhelming majority of Americans oppose the Trump strategy on Greenland. That has been shown over and over again in areas politically loyal to the president and otherwise. That just didn't make sense to the American people, and it shouldn't. The president's speech at Davos, I hope, is a turning point, but it is one that will haunt us for years to come. The reliability of the United States as an ally to NATO is now in question. You've seen it by statements made by world leaders. They're wondering what's next. What will this president come up with tomorrow? What is this so-called framework on the future of Greenland? And what is the involvement of the United States in that framework? We don't know the answers to those things, but we do know this. We are strong in this world not only because we're a good people with good values, but also because we have great friends who stood behind us as we've stood behind them. Now we have another challenge before us. Can we bring back the NATO alliance in its strength to not only protect its members, but to bring peace to the world? I think immediately of Ukraine and a war that is going on there for almost 4 years. Thousands of people have died because of the decision of Vladimir Putin, a known war criminal, to invade Ukraine and to threaten its people. We have to come together to make it clear that's unacceptable. It was no surprise to me that after this episode involving Greenland, Vladimir Putin announced publicly that's exactly why he invaded Crimea years and years ago. It's a demonstration that if you don't respect values and stand by them, but strictly depend on military might, terrible things can occur as they have in Ukraine.
Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat of Illinois, the minority whip, at a news conference today in Chicago. President Trump met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today in Davos, Switzerland. CNN reports that President Trump said it was a good meeting, but there's a ways to go toward ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. He added the war has to end. We hope it's going to end. There are a lot of people being killed. It's an ongoing process. Everybody wants to have the war end. President Zelensky, again from the CNN article, said, during any dialogue with any president, I have to defend the interests of my country. That's why the dialogue is maybe it's not simple, but it was today. It was positive. President Zelensky also gave a speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, imploring European countries to unite to face threats such as Russia and not always look to the United States, whose current president is someone like Donald Trump.
Last year, most of the time was spent talking about long-range weapons for Ukraine. And everybody said that the solution was within range. Now, no one is even talking about it. But Russian missiles and Shaheeds are still here. And we still have the coordinates of the factories where they are made. Today, they target Ukraine. Tomorrow, it could be any NATO country. And here in Europe, we are advised not to mention tomahawks. Not to mention tomahawks to the Americans, not to spoil the mood. And we are told not to bring up Taurus missiles. When the subject is Turkey, diplomats say don't offend Greece. When it's Greece, they say be careful with Turkey. In Europe, there are endless internal arguments and things left unsaid that stop Europe from uniting and speaking honestly enough to find real solutions. And too often, Europeans turn against each other, leaders, parties, movements, and communities, instead of standing together to stop Russia, which brings the same destruction to everyone. Instead of becoming a truly global power, Europe remains a beautiful but fragmented kaleidoscope of small and middle powers. Instead of taking the lead in defending freedom worldwide, especially when America's focus shifts elsewhere, Europe looks lost, trying to convince the US president to change. But he will not change.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland today. CBS News writes that U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are set to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow later on Thursday to discuss a peace deal that would end the bloody conflict between Russia and Ukraine. They will then fly directly to the UAE, where the meetings will continue in military working groups, Witkoff said. U.S. House Representatives is debating a resolution that would restrict President Trump from taking further military action in Venezuela without congressional approval. We'll have more on that when Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea. It's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. CBS News writing the House will take up another war powers resolution on Thursday in response to President Trump's recent military operation in Venezuela, as Democrats continue to hammer the issue and aim to block further military action in the South American country. The vote comes a week after the White House peeled off GOP support for a similar measure in the Senate that narrowly failed to advance. Two Senate Republicans who flipped their votes to help sink the resolution said Secretary of State Marco Rubio gave them assurances that the president would seek congressional authorization if the administration plans to put U.S. troops in Venezuela. Some of the reporting from CBS News. The resolution was sponsored by Congressman Jim McGovern, Democrat from Massachusetts.
Nicolas Maduro, a brutal tyrant, was removed from power, and the Trump administration replaced Maduro with his own damn vice president. I mean, is that the big victory that my friends think we should be celebrating? Meet the new boss, same as the old boss? They left in power the same illegitimate regime that rules through oppression, fraud, and violence. They left in control the same security apparatus that violates people's rights. They preserved the same corrupt cartel state. Am I missing something here? Because from what I can tell, the president put our troops in harm's way without congressional consent, all so that he could replace one dictator with another dictator. Everything is the same except the face at the podium. And now the president says he's the one running Venezuela. I don't even know what the hell that means. He says we control the oil. What happens if the Venezuelan people don't want that? Will he send troops into Venezuela? What is the clearly defined mission here? I don't know what it is. I mean, look what's happened since he claimed he's in charge. Repression has gotten worse. Security forces are interrogating people at checkpoints, confiscating phones, detaining journalists. Again, I ask, what was this all about? And if we don't know what, and we don't know what will happen next, shouldn't we all agree, whether you support Trump's actions or oppose them, that we should have a debate on this stuff? That we should authorize an expansion of military forces if that's what's in the future, that should be a debate, we should have a vote on it. That's all we're asking here.
Congressman Jim McGovern, Democrat of Massachusetts, on the House floor. He split the Democratic debate time with Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York, the Foreign Affairs Committee ranking member. And when Congressman Brian Mast, Republican of Florida, Foreign Affairs Committee chair, spoke, he referred to both of them.
Neither of my colleagues bothered to say anything about what their bill they're bringing forward actually does. They didn't say a word about it. So let's quote their own bill for them, since they clearly don't want to talk about it. They want to remove U.S. forces from hostilities in Venezuela. That is what the bill says. Anybody can go read it, black ink, white paper. So let's get straight to the point. The U.S. is not at war with Venezuela. I know you all predicted that there's going to be some forever protracted war, but we were never at war with Venezuela. There are no boots on the ground. Democrats are asking us to vote on a resolution about a situation that literally does not exist. We do not have anybody there in Venezuela fighting. There are no tanks on the ground in Caracas. There are no snipers in the tree line. Doesn't exist. Again, we are not at war. Maybe they're conferring about that right now. Let me confer with my colleagues a minute. Are we at war? I confirmed with my staff, we're not at war. Are there any troops on the ground? I confirmed with my staff also, there are no troops on the ground. They should confer with their staff. I see them doing that. Your Senate Democrat colleagues, they tried to bring this exact same resolution to the floor of the Senate. But even the Senate was smart enough to pull it because they didn't want to be embarrassed. Because let's say it again, we are not at war.
Congressman Brian Mast, Republican of Florida, the Foreign Affairs Committee chair, on the House floor. The House defeated this resolution on a tie vote, 215 to 215. Two Republicans joining Democrats in voting yes, Don Bacon of Nebraska and Thomas Massie of Kentucky. From CNN, a group of Senate Democrats are demanding to know whether President Donald Trump's inner circle stands to profit from Venezuelan oil sales after CNN recently reported details of the administration's private talks with the nation's biggest oil companies. In a letter sent Wednesday night to White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, 14 Democrats are urging senior officials to immediately disclose any financial interest they have in companies dealing with the oil industry in Venezuela. That was from CNN. And this is Washington Today. From ABC News, the House will look to pass this year's final tranche of spending bills on Thursday, an effort that is being complicated by Democratic lawmakers' concerns that the measure funding the Department of Homeland Security inadequately addresses President Donald Trump's mass deportation efforts. The House has already passed 8 of the 12 annual appropriations bills that fund federal agencies and programs. If the final 4 bills pass on Thursday, action would then move to the Senate, with final passage needed before a January 30th deadline to avoid a partial government shutdown. Reporting from ABC News, there were 2 spending bills up today. One covered the Departments of Defense, Housing, Health, Labor, Education, and Transportation. and the other one was only on Homeland Security. Congresswoman Catherine Clark, Democrat of Massachusetts, the minority whip, spoke against the Homeland Security spending bill, saying it did not have reforms to ICE, immigration and customs enforcement.
Republicans had the opportunity in this bill to enact common sense checks on ICE operations. They refused. First, they refused to ensure ICE abides by the same laws and procedures as our local and state police, that they're unmasked when on duty, that they actually wear the body cameras, that they wear a nameplate identifying who they are, and that they are held responsible for excessive force. Second, the GOP refused to join us in upholding the Constitution. Not only are these arrests warrantless, ICE has now determined they have the right to search your home without a judicial warrant. That is illegal and it is unconstitutional. Third, they refuse to make sure that the use of deadly force is always thoroughly investigated. When Renee Good was shot to death, Kristi Noem declared her a domestic terrorist within hours. The only investigation Noem was interested in was an investigation into Renee Good's widow. That is not justice. That is not security for the American people. Fourth, Republicans refuse to agree to the simple concept that American citizens should not be detained and deported, that people going about their business should not be kidnapped because of the color of their skin or because they're engaging in peaceful protests. Finally, Republicans refuse to prioritize the very real work that DHS does in our communities, stopping fentanyl trafficking, stopping child trafficking, stopping cartels. DHS is taking those investigators off of those cases and putting them on ICE raids. It is at the expense of our national security. When the GOP can't even agree to common sense guardrails, it is clear this isn't about immigration, this isn't about security, this is about state-sanctioned terror. This is about the political retribution of a vengeful president. I will not rubber stamp the federal government's use of political violence against its own people, and I am asking every member to join me in voting no.
Congresswoman Catherine Clark, Democrat of Massachusetts, the minority whip on the House floor. Congressman Mark Amodei, Republican of Nevada, chair of the Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee, spoke in favor of the spending bill.
The fiscal year 2026 Homeland Bill under consideration today furthers this administration's goals of undoing the damage caused by the previous administration, starting with the border. This funds the president's priorities, codifies reductions and efficiencies, and operationalizes border security and immigration enforcement investments in the reconciliation process. I also want to note that we have, let's start with ICE. And I know people have lamented that, boy, you know, we didn't really get everything we wanted and all that stuff. It's like, guess what? There's something that we should both be celebrating here today, and it's about ICE. Because the last administration wasn't real big on ICE, kind of maybe hoped they didn't exist or whatever, one of the things that didn't happen with respect to ICE, like all other law enforcement agencies around, was the use and implementation of body cameras. So you don't have to rely on somebody happen to have their cell phone and have a good angle, whether they're accusing or defending themselves for whatever they did. This bill funds body cameras for ICE personnel so that we can have first person, if you will, access to what people really think was done. You like a pay raise for the Coast Guard? This bill does that. You like more infrastructure for the Coast Guard? This bill does that. You like grants for first responders and for nonprofit religious worship institutions? This bill does that. The foundation is undeniable. So, as the tax on houses of worship have increased over the last few years, we're providing more money for that. Finally, we ensure that CISA, the agency that's charged with protecting our critical infrastructure like power and water, have the resources required to prevent attacks from nation-state adversaries like China and Russia. Simply put, This bill ensures that the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security who work tirelessly to keep America safe have the resources and tools they need to protect this great nation.
Congressman Mark Amodei, Republican from Nevada, on the House floor. The House passed this Homeland Security Department spending bill for fiscal year 2026 by a vote of 220 to 207. There was one Republican no, Thomas Massie of Kentucky, and 7 Democratic yeses. Henry Cuellar of Texas, Don Davis of North Carolina, Laura Gillen of New York, Jared Golden of Maine, Vicente Gonzalez of Texas, Marie Glusenkamp Perez of Washington State, and Tom Suozzi of New York. The House also passed a separate 3-bill spending package covering defense, labor, health and human services, education, transportation, and housing. That was 341 to 88. All those bills have now been put together along with 2 other spending bills that the House had passed previously, sending it all to the Senate. January 30th is the deadline to get everything signed into law to avoid another partial government shutdown. More on ICE. Reuters reporting from Minneapolis that Vice President J.D. Vance will be visiting Minneapolis on Thursday to show support for U.S. immigration agents whose aggressive tactics have drawn weeks of outcry since an Immigration and Customs Enforcement officer shot dead Renee Good, a 37-year-old U.S. citizen and mother of 3. Tensions appeared unlikely to subside after school officials in a nearby suburb said ICE agents had detained a 5-year-old boy. Federal authorities showed little sign of softening their approach, announcing on Thursday the arrest of 2 people in connection with a protest that disrupted a church service in St. Paul on Sunday. That was the article from Reuters. Vice President Vance answered reporters' questions while meeting with the ICE agents in Minneapolis, and one, he referenced the 5-year-old boy.
Are you proud of how your administration is conducting this immigration crackdown here in Minnesota right now?
Well, I'm proud of the fact that we're standing behind law enforcement, and I'm proud of the fact that we're enforcing the country's laws. But, you asked a question about this 5-year-old kid. I actually saw this terrible story while I was coming to Minneapolis. We just left Toledo, Ohio this morning for an economic messaging event. And I see this story, and I'm a father of a 5-year-old, actually, a 5-year-old little boy. And I think to myself, oh, my God, this is terrible. How did we arrest a 5-year-old? Well, I do a little bit more follow-up research. And what I find is that the 5-year-old was not arrested, that his dad was an illegal alien. And then when they went to arrest his illegal alien father, the father ran. So the story is that ICE detained a 5-year-old. Well, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to let a 5-year-old child freeze to death? Are they not supposed to arrest an illegal alien in the United States of America? If the argument is that you can't arrest people who have violated our laws because they have children, then every single parent is going to be completely given immunity from ever being the subject of law enforcement. That doesn't make any sense. No one thinks that makes any sense. Now, there are so many of these cases like that where if you just understand the context, there have been a number of situations that I've looked into personally where I say, wait a second, we don't want ICE arresting American citizens. They're supposed to be enforcing the immigration laws against illegal aliens. So then I look into it and I find out that the American citizen who was arrested took a swing at an ICE officer. You can't have that happen. And of course they have to defend themselves. And of course they have the right to detain somebody who assaults a law enforcement officer. Now, this is my point. Do we want these things to happen? Do we want these arrests to be so chaotic? No, we don't. These guys want it least of all. But if we had a little cooperation from local and from local and state officials, I think the chaos would go way down in this community.
Vice President J.D. Vance today in Minneapolis. He also called for protesters to be peaceful and warned that they would be arrested and prosecuted if they impede ICE officers. The vice president also asked about a report in the media that an ICE memo from last spring authorized agents to enter homes of those suspected of being in the U.S. illegally with an administrative warrant, not a warrant signed by a judge.
Do you believe that you can forcibly enter with an administrative warrant, or would that be a violation of the Fourth Amendment?
Well, our understanding is that you can enforce the immigration laws of the country under an administrative order if you have an administrative warrant. That's what we think. That's our understanding of the law. That's our best faith attempt to understand the law. Again, this is something courts will weigh in on. I won't speak to that. But yes, most immigration law in our country is not done through the criminal system with a judge. It's done through the administrative law system. We're going to continue that practice just as they did in the Biden administration or any other administration.
Vice President J.D. Vance at a news conference with ICE agents behind him in Minneapolis. Fox News writes that a federal magistrate judge on Thursday rejected the Justice Department's attempt to bring charges against former CNN anchor Don Lemon in connection with Sunday's anti-ICE protest at a Minnesota church. Fox News Digital has learned Lemon was expected to face charges after Attorney General Pam Bondi warned that no one is above the law on the heels of the church incident. That was from Fox News. And some news about Minnesota politics. This from The Hill. Senator Amy Klobuchar, Democrat of Minnesota, filed to form a gubernatorial committee on Thursday, putting her one step closer toward a run for Minnesota governor. Klobuchar is widely expected to announce a run for governor after Governor Tim Walz, also a Democrat, said earlier this month he would be dropping his bid for a third term. More now about immigration. The governor of Maine, Janet Mills, a Democrat, held a news conference today in Portland. The Portland Press-Herald writing that reports of widespread immigration arrests across greater Portland and Lewiston continued to spread Thursday, the third day of what federal officials have dubbed Operation Catch of the Day. On Wednesday, the Department of Homeland Security officially announced that the operation was underway, the first confirmation from federal officials of an escalation of immigration enforcement that state and local leaders spoke about last week. The DHS spokesperson said the effort is targeting the worst of the worst criminal illegal aliens. That was the article at the Portland Press-Herald. Here is Governor Mills at a news conference in that city.
Governor, why, in your opinion, is your state now on the bullseye?
Well, he's gone to a lot of blue states, hasn't he? He went to Chicago, Illinois, Los Angeles, California, and Minneapolis, Minnesota, all Democratic governors. I happen to be a Democratic governor. Ostensibly, they're coming here, they say, because of an immigrant population that they find in disfavor. So I don't know. You'll have to ask them why they're here.
Do you believe that there are 1,400 people living in Maine illegally with criminal backgrounds?
With criminal backgrounds? Well, let's see the documents. I'd be shocked if they found 1,400 people with criminal charges against them. But what we're hearing is not that anyway. What we're hearing is that people with no criminal backgrounds are being detained and subject to perhaps deportation or at least arrest. People who are being torn from their families and from young children. People who are part of the workforce here in Maine, a workforce that we desperately need and desperately value. And that's a shame. You know, it's disruptive and it's causing a lot of fear and unnecessary anxiety in the community and among families who don't deserve this kind of treatment.
Maine Governor Janet Mills, a Democrat, at a news conference today in Portland. New York Times writing about the ICE operations in that state. A number of asylum seekers from African countries who arrived in the United States during the Biden administration have settled in Maine, joining a Somali population that started arriving there in the early 2000s when refugees from the country began settling in Lewiston. Yet Maine remains an overwhelmingly white state and one of the oldest populations in the country. Some employers have begun looking to immigrants to fill labor gaps as native-born employees have either left the workforce or retired. That was from the New York Times. This is Washington Today. From Reuters, executives from leading U.S. health insurers sought to deflect blame for rising costs for consumers during a congressional hearing on Thursday, as lawmakers accused their companies of practices that reduce competition and lead to soaring premiums. Insurance executives from CVS Health, Cigna, United Health, and Elevance were called to testify as millions of Americans face dramatic hikes in their Obamacare insurance costs following the expiration of special COVID-era tax credits. That was the article from Reuters. The hearing was before the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health. Here's part of that questioning from Congressman Buddy Carter, Republican of Georgia, to United Health Group CEO Stephen Helmsley.
Have you ever personally looked in a patient in the eye and explained why your company denied them a medication their doctor said that was needed? Have you ever personally looked a patient in the eye and told them that?
I have looked patients in the eyes many times. I don't recall whether it's regarding a prior authorization, but it is.
Well, Mr. Hemsley, let me tell you, I practiced pharmacy for 40 years. I'm the one who had to look the patient in the eye. I'm the one who had to tell them that on your behalf. It's not fun. Mr. Hemsley, I want to tell you a story about Andrea Kelly. She's a single mother from Kentucky who was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer and has endured years of chemotherapy, surgery, and radiation just to stay alive. And she wants to stay alive because she's got a 7-year-old daughter. Despite being stable on the medications for a year, United Healthcare is now denying Andrea her Lupron injection and Veoza medication. According to her doctor, these denials are actively increasing, as you would imagine and you understand, they're actively increasing Andrea's risk of cancer recurrence. This is not about convenience or cost. This is about whether her cancer comes back. To quote Andrea, and I quote, "I am a single mom and would do anything to live as long as I can for my daughter, who is now 7. I need access to my medication so that I can live for my child." End quote. It was me. I was the one who went to the counter. I was the one who had to tell him that. Not you, Mr. Joyner, not any of you on this panel, but me, the pharmacist. I was the one who had to tell him that. Mr. Hemsley, knowing that your company's denial raises Andrea's risk of cancer recurrence, why is United Healthcare overriding her doctors and denying her medication? Do you have any idea?
I don't know that particular circumstances.
Can you help me out here? Because I want to help her. What can I tell her? What can I tell Andrea that she can tell her 7-year-old daughter?
Actually, I would love to learn more about that and see if we can't help solve that problem.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Hemsley. President Trump's proposing a bold new health care plan, and I applaud him for that, one that puts patients in control. Thank God somebody finally realizes instead of sending the money, my colleagues, instead of sending the money to insurance companies, send it to the patients. Let them create a competitive marketplace. The president is proposing this. He wants to put patients in control, expand choice, and ensure transparent pricing. Can we count on you, Mr. Hemsley, to support President Trump's great health care plan?
Representative, we will be open to any kind of bipartisan solution, and I think the president's thoughts contribute to the conversation. Good ideas to be considered, but
I certainly hope so, because for 40 years, I'm the one.
Congressman Buddy Carter, Republican of Georgia, asking questions to United Health Group CEO Stephen Hemsley at today's subcommittee hearing. Congressman Frank Pallone, Democrat from New Jersey, also asked about President Trump's health care proposal to another witness, Ellen Allen, Executive Director of West Virginians for Affordable Health Care.
Just last week, President Trump put out his so-called Great American Health Care Plan, where he says we shouldn't fund ACA enhanced premium tax credits, and we should just give cash to people to put in tax-exempt health savings accounts. So, Ms. Allen, your testimony speaks to the more than $25,000 in out-of-pocket health care costs you're facing this year, and that's even with becoming Medicare eligible in September. In the face of losing the ACA enhanced premium tax credits, would having access to a health savings account put a dent in your health care costs? Let's even say that the health savings account was preloaded with a couple $1,000s, which seems to be what the president's talking about. How does that compare to the reality of the health care costs that you're facing?
Thank you for the question. Frankly, that's insulting. A $2,000 deposit into a health savings account for someone whose premium is $2,000 a month does not go a long way. So it wouldn't be very helpful at all.
Yeah, my point is that the president and I think the Republicans are not facing the reality. They have these ideas, which they even, some of them passed on the floor a couple of weeks ago. The president talks about it. But they're not really addressing the root causes of rising health care. And the only people that I know who, talk about this, willing to do a high deductible, we hear like could be $7,000, $8,000 a year, and then, you get a couple thousand in a health savings account, are people that are wealthy. Because you can't, it seems to me, you can't, put money into, first of all, you can't even put money in a health savings account unless you have some excess money to spare, right? And so this idea of highlighting the health savings account as an answer, it just isn't. It only benefits the wealthy, in my opinion, because the majority of Americans can't afford, their medical bills, much less pre-fund a tax advantage account for thousands of dollars. It doesn't do anything for them. And I really think that if we want to address the affordability crisis now, the only answer is extending the ACA enhanced premium tax credits.
Congressman Frank Pallone, Democrat from New Jersey, with witness Ellen Allen, Executive Director of West Virginians for Affordable Health Care. She's 64 years old and testified today that her premiums for health care are going up from $500 a month to nearly $2,000 a month with the expiration of the Enhanced Affordable Care Act credits. Wall Street today, the Dow up 306, NASDAQ up 211, S&P up 37. NBC News writing that President Donald Trump on Thursday filed a $5 billion lawsuit against J.P. Morgan Chase and its CEO Jamie Dimon, claiming that the bank improperly closed his accounts for political reasons. The J.P. Morgan Chase spokesperson said, "While we regret President Trump has sued us, we believe the suit has no merit." Dimon has been critical of some Trump policies, most notably inflation, while supportive of others, including efforts to streamline the U.S. government. On Wednesday, Dimon criticized the Trump administration over its immigration policies. Child welfare advocate and 1111 Media founder and CEO was at a news conference today with both Republican and Democratic House members supporting the Disrupt Explicit Forged Images and Non-Consensual Edits or Defiance Act, which allows victims of non-consensual deepfake pornography to sue those who produce and distribute it. Here's Paris Hilton at the news conference.
Before, someone had to betray your trust and steal something real. Now, all it takes is a computer and a stranger's imagination. Deepfake pornography has become an epidemic. I know today that there are over 100,000 explicit deepfake images of me made by AI. 100,000 circulating the internet. Not one of them is real. Not one of them is consensual. And each time a new one appears, that horrible feeling returns. That fear that someone somewhere is looking at it right now and thinking it's real. No amount of money or lawyers can stop or protect me from more. It's the newest form of victimization happening at scale to your daughters, your sisters, your friends, and neighbors. A staggering 1 in 8 girls today are experiencing the harms of AI-generated deepfake porn.
Paris Hilton at today's news conference on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol building in Washington. Also there, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a Democrat from New York, and Congresswoman Laurel Lee, Republican of Florida, plus Angie Kay from the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. The Senate passed the Defiance Act last week by voice vote. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. A programming note, a new C-SPAN ceasefire airs Friday at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern. Our guests this week are 2 members of Congress, Mike Flood, Republican of Nebraska, and Emmanuel Cleaver, Democrat from Missouri. C-SPAN ceasefire Friday at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern. Have a good night.